Welcome back to Agritecture's podcast, Locally Grown In. I'm here with my co-host, Briana, and we're going to be traveling to New Delhi, India.
Hey, Henry. How's it going?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm good. Holding on the fort in New York.
Yeah, I know. I never see you these days. I'm always somewhere else. And you're running the blog, you're running the podcast, you're running our events. I mean, there's just so much that you're taking care of while I travel and visit farms and clients.
Taking care of everything, taking care of business.
Well, we're here to talk about the business of local food, of course. And I'm really excited to talk about this city because New Delhi is in India. And you know, for me, I don't know if you know this about me, but for 2 years of my life, I was living in Toronto. And for about 6 months of that, I worked with East Indians. And I was able to learn a little bit of Hindi and interact with people from India, all different kinds of provinces across India.
I was wondering how you learned Hindi.
Yeah, that was how, so it was kind of more like a party trick at the beginning. But it actually really opened my mind to the whole world of India and the culture. So like the reason why I'm excited about this episode with New Delhi is because even though, believe it or not, Briana, with all my travels, I have never been to India.
So I guess we have to put that on our list.
We have to put that on our list. I definitely really want to go. And just suddenly after this episode, I want to go even more.
I'm really excited for this episode because, as our listeners may know, I'm Agritecture's media strategist. So I manage our website, our blog, our social media. So I'm constantly interacting with our audience, and many of our viewers are from India. As a global company, it's always interesting to see the breakup of the traffic on our website. Across the board, India is always one of the top nations that we're seeing traffic coming from.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really big reason why we did this. And we hope that we know that the lessons actually from these two conversations we have in this episode are going to be valuable for any entrepreneur in India considering hydroponics or urban agriculture. You talked about the traffic from India, and I was blogging, I was managing the blog before we brought you on, and just like literally me in my dorm room. And even from the early days, I mean, people from India were very active in asking questions and very, very curious about hydroponics. Wow. and thinking a lot about food security. And I think it's just so exciting to see the passion of the people in India to want to create innovation. They want to do it in a way that's very, very mass scale. Like they don't want to do something that's small because they are such a big country and they have so much diversity. So they rarely think small. And I think that's really interesting when when they have so many challenges to be able to develop something big.
Do you think these audiences coming from India that are interested in hydroponics, do you think they were traditional farmers and now they're looking for new solutions? Because in the interview, they also talk about this need for a change in the psychology of people. People are less interested and they feel like they're moving backwards if they resort to agriculture because farming is what their ancestors did. So that in the interview, they talk about this need to change this mentality. So I'm curious if the interest coming out of India is from people who have experience in traditional agriculture or...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix. I think a lot of the people interested in hydroponics obviously are in urban areas where there isn't there's a lack of soil, and so they might want to do that, or they're younger, so they're kind of attracted to the technology and the novelty of it, which we see around the world. But I think at the same time, I get contacted, and even our consulting arm has been contacted a lot by existing farmers that are looking to bring hydroponics into their work, which is also really interesting because they want to diversify a lot of their crop and their product. I mean, one of the things that was always interesting to me in the early days, and something we wrote about on the blog, I think a long time ago, was about fodder. So one of the issues in India is that there's a lot of smallholder farmers. And when you have smallhold animal husbandry, you have a really difficult time making that work. You don't have the scale to kind of be competitive. And so let's say you want to buy feed. Well, the smaller your farm is, the lower priority you're going to be on the list of the feed seller to get that to you. So you're going to get lower quality feed if you're a small farmer. But if you think about hydroponics, you can grow grass in hydroponic systems in a very low cost way on small plots, taking up very little land, and provide some independence to these farmers. So it's always been interesting to me to see how that might evolve. And that's an example of how hydroponics could be adapted to both rural and peri-urban areas to make a really big impact on farmers in India.
So it sounds like there's a huge opportunity for CEA in India. And on that note, why don't we hear from our interview?
Yeah, let's dive into it. We've got 2 interviews coming up next, and I was in London when I was speaking to them. I just have to say I found them super inspiring. So I hope you do too. So now we're moving on to the interview portion of Locally Grown In, and I'm extremely excited to speak to 2 urban agriculture and smart cities innovators out of New Delhi, India. As a blogger on urban agriculture for about 10 years, it's been really exciting to see how India has risen as far as their interest in urban agriculture is concerned. India is about the second largest source of traffic to our blog, so we're really excited to highlight some of the trends and opportunities that are happening in New Delhi. So I'm joined today by Bharat Budhiraja, who actually started one of the first vertical farms in India and has been through a long journey we're going to hear about, moving towards organic farming now. And I'm also here with Ambar Sinha, who works with the government of India in the Urban Development Ministry on smart cities work as well. How are you both doing today?
Good to meet you, Henry. And let's chat about some urban agriculture.
Yeah, let's do it, Bharat. So let's start with you, Ambar, since you're working with the government now. Can you give us a bit of a macro view? Tell us about New Delhi. Tell us about your work at the government and some of the questions you're looking at and the problems you're trying to solve.
Let me try and give you a picture of New Delhi. The first question you asked is, it's a very heterogeneous population, and a majority of people who come and stay in Delhi are living in houses that are between 200 and 300 square feet big, and that's the average. And it's got a population of about 25 million, 2.5 crores. And now, when you try to solve a number of issues, and when a government looks at a city that's as heterogeneous and as diverse as Delhi, urban agriculture usually comes very low on that list, and various things such as water, sanitation, clean air, that's something people have been struggling with, transportation, mobility, safety, they take precedence. So over the last few years, with the advent of smart cities and with the budget of about $30 billion, they have been trying to focus on the health of citizens. And through that, they're trying to target better nutrition. I think, and the first thing they point to is that if there is enough strain on the agricultural system in the rural areas, is there a way to bring in urban agriculture to the urban areas? And not just at the institution level, but right down to the individual level. So that is the focus of the government, but it still hasn't taken off the scale that people had hoped.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. I mean, some really, I would say, extreme numbers for someone like me to hear. 25 million. New York City has 7.5 million people living in it. 200, 300 feet per house. That's also very small. I imagine there's a lot of families and people living in those small spaces together. So the whole lifestyle and the whole way the city interacts must be totally different than a lot of our listeners can imagine. I think on the smart cities piece, it's been really interesting to observe, because when smart cities first started, it was about 5G and autonomous vehicles and smart transportation. And now it's kind of trying to get a human face. And we've been trying to bring urban agriculture into it and think about, asking these questions. Can a city really be smart without agriculture? So you said it's been difficult to get that case forward. Is it because of a similar issue? Where does this 30 billion towards smart cities, what is the focus of it? Is it, you said, on nutrition, but I would think in smart cities it's more about technology, no?
No, I think that is where I think there is a very big, that's a misnomer in the country, is when you look at Barcelona, one of the world's first smart cities, Singapore, London, that is where the focus on technology, IoT, 5G, and things like that come in. But if you look at India, we are still trying to grapple with issues such as sewage, getting people safe drinking water. I mean, how do you get safe drinking water to 25 million people? So the Smart City mission that was launched in 2014-15 was primarily not just about the technology aspects of it, but it focused on getting all the core infrastructural aspects, the livability aspects and the indexes up, and then merging that with technology. The priority of urban agriculture and how they intend to merge that with tech is now that a majority of the population is connected to the internet. 80% of population in Delhi has a smartphone. They're now trying to leverage that to their advantage through various ways, using incentives, using, if you purchase from a local grocery store rather than from a big BT cotton store, or you from a very big supermarket, they'll probably incentivize that. But again, as I said, from a priority list standpoint, that's really taken a backseat.
Yeah, of course. I mean, those other human needs are going to be a priority. And hopefully, as your agency solves some of those problems, urban agriculture may get more attention. But I suppose we can also talk about the potential that urban agriculture has to solve some of those problems. What comes to mind is the business case or the historical case of the Victory Gardens as a response to scarcity in World War II. These were small gardens that ended up providing the majority of the food that these, especially the vegetables and fruits that residents needed in the war. If we look at the case of Havana, when it was cut off during the blockade, they were able to achieve food security by actually encouraging different households to grow different products and share those. Are you seeing some of those trends? Is that how your agency is maybe thinking about urban agriculture? And I guess my follow-up question is, how does the typology of those buildings, the 200 square foot buildings, how does that lend itself to the kinds of models you might imagine in New Delhi?
So, this is a very valid point. I had actually read about the success story of Havana, and that was just a very cool thing. And we tried to replicate that in parts of Delhi. And a part of my project specifically is trying to incentivize people to adopt urban agriculture. Now, you have to delve deep in the psychology of a citizen, because at some level, a citizen is also a consumer, right? So when you're trying to mix the two, it was important for us to identify what the limitations for people to adopt urban agriculture was. And when I say urban farming, urban agriculture, in the context of these buildings that you spoke of, 200 square feet, you have probably 4 to 5 people living in that much area with such a high population density. Somebody installing a very complex unit who can't afford it, who's probably surviving on $200 a month, a whole family income. So what you try to do is, for them, the definition of urban agriculture is even as small as putting potted plants in the house. It may not be as complex as hydroponics. It may not be as complex as vertical farming, but it's as simple as that. Part of what I am doing is identifying the incentives that people want.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts and that macro view. There's such a great opportunity for open source models for parts of India to improve food security through urban agriculture. So for example, you could have an open source model for the typical type of rooftop that's available that could be accessed from smartphones. And certainly Agritecture is really passionate about that. We did a passion project that hasn't been about making revenue called Plus Farm. You can learn about it at plus.farm. And it's 100% open source instructions for a vertical farm that you could build at home. And the point isn't that you build it exactly the way that we've done it. The point is that you learn the basics and develop your own with your own budget, et cetera. But I think that's really the opportunity there. I also think it's really interesting to think about how urban agriculture kind of helps the population understand the food, water, energy nexus and maybe solve some of these other greater problems you were talking about. I can't think of a technology that would fit under smart cities or under urban development that embraces food, water, energy, and waste better than urban agriculture. So I think that cities need to think about how it can be a gateway to innovation from residents and from entrepreneurs. And it's not just about the food produced, but it's about how we think about unlocking those opportunities in the urban context.
Henry, I'd just like to chime in about one thing very quickly. Is you very succinctly put in the point about the nexus of these three things. But there's another thing I'd like to add here is the psychology of the people here. Because very often in the country, when I say, you've got a farm, you've got to grow your own produce, automatically people start thinking, why should I go back to a redundant way of agriculture? That's essentially what I migrated away from. My ancestors probably moved from the rural areas to the urban areas. Because in India, farming has been perceived as a very rural activity. If you look at the aspirations of people, they see farming as a very archaic activity. So that is something that we're trying to change. And that has been, in fact, the hardest thing to get across to the people. And I mean, what you mentioned on the website, Plus Farms, as something, if somebody can come up with a solution to incentivize that, to nudge the behavior to get the people to adopt it would be amazing.
That's an excellent point. People are as you move towards wealth, you're going to think of farming as a poor activity. And so
Right.
You're right. People are trying to escape that. But thankfully today we have a farmer on the call. So Bharat, I really want to hear about your journey because it's been a bit of a wild one, if I recall learning about it first, right?
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Sure. So if I may just briefly talk about it. And I met these guys from Boston, from MIT, from a company called Promethean Power Systems. So they developed this thing called a thermal battery for basically chilling any agricultural produce without the need of diesel generators. So basically in the developing world, power is a big issue. Availability of good 24-hour power. So the co-founders asked me if I wanted to move back to India and help them basically commercialize the technology from a lab at MIT to a full-scale commercial operation in India. So how agriculture comes into my blood is actually because of this company. Through these guys, I got an opportunity to travel rural India. I got to see the countryside. I got to see people doing rice farming, wheat farming, mustard farming. And this really inspired me. And I was like, maybe I should try agriculture. And then this was my driving force. And so based on that, I just started doing some small experiments with my late father. He inspired me to take up some small hydroponic projects at our rooftop in our home in Delhi. And we started growing some tomatoes, some cucumbers. We even tried some watermelons and melons. And it was so fascinating to have ripened produce right at your rooftop. But then I really wanted to take this up as a business. And in India, the thing is that Henry must have heard of the word jugaad. So this thing is that it's called innovation, but using a very low amount of money and trying to make an innovative thing. So I wanted to, and since I was an engineer, I knew that I could use those things and simple innovation to make a vertical farm. And I actually was able to do that. And so I first used a shipping container and I modified it and I made a container farm. And then that was a good experiment. I grew basil and I was able to grow even jalapeno peppers. So then I set up this huge farm capable of almost growing 4,000 heads of lettuce over almost 600 square feet. I was almost like just a month away from launch, and then tragedy struck and I actually lost the entire facility in a massive fire. And so that's something
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that was quite bad. And that's something I just want to bring up quickly in a minute about the side of urban agriculture, especially vertical farming, that maybe everybody's not aware of. Because since it's using a lot of electricity and we're taking all this power from the grid, unless the grid where you put up this vertical farm is very stable and there are no power fluctuations, the earthing and other things, how the connections are made, unless they're very robust, it's a high risk proposition. So here in India, some things, we're still learning. And then I think that was maybe the missing link. And maybe there was some short circuit, basically. They say the people who were from the insurance company, they say that there was some short circuit in the main electrical panel. So yeah, that was that. And so then I put that project on the back burner for a bit and then started thinking what I could do. So agriculture was still a big passion. And then in parallel, we had a small vacation home up in the Himalayas in India. This place called Rani Khet, at an altitude of about 7,000 feet and about 6-7 hours drive away from New Delhi. Very beautiful scenic place, good weather. The temperature is never above 25 degrees Celsius, even in the peak summers, and sometimes snows in the winter. So ideal for growing a lot of crops. And so I thought that I could start doing some agriculture there, but then land-based agriculture, because that area has a lot of land available. There's water availability isn't a problem. And there's a lot of organic compost and manure available from the livestock that the villages rear there. And all the animals, there are not a lot of milch animals over there. So I thought that could be a good starting point for doing some organic farming there. And I actually started growing kale because these days kale is a rage, as you're aware, Henry, right?
Yes.
So
Not just in the US, but also in India.
yes, it is catching up a
It's
lot.
even, I was in the Middle East recently, in Saudi Arabia, it's also getting very popular. So global phenomenon.
Exactly. So we started with kale, and so then I first started out with making kale powder. So just growing the leaves and drying it, and so that sells on Amazon in India. And then I also later on started some fresh kale leaves, which I'm giving to some supermarkets in Delhi. So we basically harvest kale every morning in the hills at about just about at sunrise, and then we right now use the local transportation networks and transport the kale in ice boxes. So the concept is it's called we call it cooperative farming here.
Okay.
So I work with them. I give them the seeds. I tell them what agricultural practices to follow, and then they grow it. And then I have people stationed there locally, since it's 8 hours away from Delhi and it's not possible for me to shift there permanently. So I am in constant touch on emails and phone. And then there is a growing methodology. I tell them that based on the weather patterns, they plant the seeds, then they harvest it, and then how much to water, when to give the manure. And then there's a check and balance, and then I collect it. I buy it at a fixed price from them, which is better than the rate that they get if they would sell a produce in the local agricultural bulk supply. It's called they call it a mandi. There's the local word mandi over here.
So you're providing a single brand to sell the product under at a competitive price.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much for telling your story. It's so valuable and also fascinating to hear that journey. Also, I'm sorry for your loss with your family issues and the farm itself, but your journey is truly an inspiration. And so I think it's really interesting to think about vertical farming, which is very high tech, very sexy, as a gateway technology to bring people into agriculture. And I kind of want to bring that to you, Ambar. You know, there's this idea of living labs in the EU as part of Horizon 2020, these places where they in person demonstrate a technology or an idea or an approach. They invite public and they invite academics to be part of that. Is there anything like that happening in New Delhi?
Right. So something very similar to what you spoke about, the living labs, and a very micro version of what Bharat is doing, and probably the scientific concept of it, the hydroponics of it. And what they're trying to do is, under the government of India's Startup India mission, they're trying to foster entrepreneurship. They also have something working in tandem with that called the Attal Innovation Mission. They both work together. And the one thing they've created, it's called the Attal Tinkering Labs. This is a very fancy name that they have for it. But the core concept of that is, in schools in India, they're trying to create laboratories and basically sandboxes for students to come in and understand the various ways in which science works, the various ways in which mechanical engineering, various multiple things. Now, within that, a few schools in Delhi, and of course, this is some of the bigger schools, have adopted how do you get more in touch with nature. So a part of that is where they bring in experts probably like Bharat, and there is a Bharat, you can chime in on this one very quickly. The school that is outside Delhi, I think IHM Pusa, the Food Technology Institute.
Yes.
Right. So they partnered with them, and they brought them to these schools to explain to the students as a part of this tinkering lab as to this is how your produce is grown, because more and more people, and especially the youth, are getting disconnected from what is happening out there in the fields. But the cascading effect of this has still is yet to be measured. We still don't know how many of these people might actually tread out and become entrepreneurs. But the hope is the least these students can do is be more aware of and more cognizant of where the produce comes from, where the food on the table comes from.
Yeah, hopefully that at least makes them better consumers or engages them in the questions around science, technology, engineering, and math, which are also important. You know, Agritecture has consulted some schools where they build small vertical farms or urban farms just to teach them, you know, how do you calculate yield and waste. And How do you measure different chemistry aspects? And how do you engineer new systems? And so it can be a way to both engage young people and older people, to be honest, in agriculture and where food comes from.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask some final questions to both of you, starting with you, Bharat. You've been through a roller coaster journey in urban agriculture. What's your advice to someone in a major city in India who is curious about starting their own urban farm? What's your advice to an entrepreneur in urban farming in India?
I'd say first thing is passion. You definitely have to have passion because farming is something that will take time to grow on you first, and also to learn the nuances, how to handle the plant nutrients, how to take care of a plant from a seedling stage to harvest. You'll need a lot of patience because you will tend to do mistakes and fail, because crops you try to do first time may not be successful, and then you'll have to do multiple growing cycles. And obviously some given things are that you have to look for a space which is open. If you're doing, let's say, open farming, like I started, if it's a rooftop farm, then you better have good sunlight, no shade, some good air ventilation, and then you have to have plenty of water. So Henry, quality drinking water is a big issue in Delhi. And so what is happening is people are drilling groundwater, and Delhi's water table is dropping very fast. And also what is happening is the salinity level is going up. So a lot of farms around Delhi are having to give up agriculture like 50 kilometers away from Delhi, because the water has become saline and the crops have stopped growing. So that's another point that people have to keep in mind, that when they start growing plants in their home, they must get their water tested. Because if they invest in, let's say, 100 pots and they invest in seeds worth $100, and then they realize that the water is not good enough, then they would have wasted time. So the first thing is they should get their water tested. Then obviously, then if they take it up, I think taking it up as a hobby is a good idea. That if you have a regular job, start learning, reading a lot, and then gradually, once you see the produce growing, share it with your friends and family. If they like it, then gradually shift and take the big step of actually doing a full-blown business. Because growing produce is one matter, and then being able to sell it at a good price is another matter. Because in India, what happens is that the quality versus quantity is a big debate in India. When you go to a end customer, you tell him this is grown in a clean environment, this is free from pesticides and chemicals, it is untouched by hand. They take some time to understand the whole concept. For them, what is most important is the price per kilo. They start comparing it to a produce which is being grown with a lot of chemicals and pesticide, which looks good. So then that's another thing, that if let's say a person who studied like me, who's done a bachelor's and a master's degree, and he goes and takes up agriculture, he'll obviously want to justify his time and effort. And so that's something they must also keep in mind, that doing the marketing aspect is going to be a tough nut to crack.
Absolutely. Those are super useful insights. I'm going to break them down a little bit. One is, passion. Is this really going to be your future? Is this thing you care about? Are you motivated by interacting with nature and plants? And also talking to customers and working with other farmers. You have to be a marketer, you have to be a grower, you have to be a salesperson. You have to do so many different roles if you're going to be a CEO of an agriculture company. I liked your point about piloting as well. It's always important to get started small and to practice, because you're not only learning about how to farm, but you're learning about how to access your customers and use new technologies in many cases in a very tight urban environment. And I also thought it was very important that you talked about access issues to water that are very relevant in India. One of the things Agritecture is doing, and we're launching it soon, is we're launching an online farm design tool for business planning for greenhouses and vertical farms. It's launching in beta now. You can learn about it at agritecture.com/designer. And the purpose of it is to help anyone who's curious about this topic to get to the numbers as fast as possible at a lower cost than hiring a consultant. So I'm hoping this will have a really positive impact in India, and we'll be announcing this more on our agritecture blog. Moving over to you, Ambar, I want to ask you a question about the future. You have, what's happening in New Delhi. You know the challenges with the demographics, the population, poverty, access to basic needs. But what do you think the future of urban agriculture is in New Delhi 10 years from now? What does that look like to you? Be honest. Do you have hope for it? Is it going to scale? Is it going to just be starting? Is it going to be buried in the numerous challenges that are going to supersede it as climate change gets worse? What's your prediction 10 years from now? If I went to New Delhi, what would I see when I look at urban agriculture?
Okay. If you were to come to New Delhi after 10 years, something that I definitely and firmly believe in is there's a sense of pride which is coming into the people, especially in the upper echelons of society, the ones who can afford better produce that is more nutritional, that is pesticide free, that was grown without any genetic modifications. That sense of pride will definitely have increased. And I think that is what is going to translate into a sense of ownership. And something I spoke about earlier as well, is that people believe that, urban farming, from a consumer standpoint and a producer standpoint, they still believe, producers in Bharat's case as well, the target demographic is very different right now. But eventually the target demographic will increase to the people because the scales will increase. The scale can increase, the economies of scale should kick in, and you'll start having affordable produce coming from cleaner, leaner ways of urban farming to the grassroots level. The second thing is, if you're trying to encourage entrepreneurial spirit, there's a sense of awareness that farming is not a trade of the poor. It is the trade of the future. And that is something that people have to embrace. And once they're able to do that, that domino effect of more and more people getting involved and more people believing that this is better for them will increase. However, having said this, none of this, I could be biased here, but none of this would be possible without strong institutional support from the banks and the government, including the Smart City Mission. We guys currently see urban farming as a subset of health and wellness. It has not yet been given that status of an independent category in which funds are transferred, because when funds by the government are given for farming and agriculture, it goes to rural areas. So I think the institutional change, the institutional mindset, which has been drilled in for the last 50, 60 years, that says it has to be in the outskirts of the city, not within the city, has to change. And I really hope that the problems such as, that is something that is, again, going to tie back into climate change, is Delhi's water table is already at about 550, 600 feet is when you get groundwater. So that's preposterous. But if you're able to take away these problems simultaneously, what Bharat said, testing the water, the salinity, you're able to create a sense of possibility, that hope that yes, urban farming is the future. So yeah, these three things, pride, awareness, and institutional support is what I believe you will be seeing change in the next 10 to 15 years.
Thank you so much for that clear and interesting picture. I am so excited about this episode. I'm so excited to be connected with both of you. You've been so succinct and clear, and I think you've added so much value to this podcast. Thank you so much for your time today to be on Locally Grown in New Delhi. I am so excited to hear what people respond to this and really appreciate all the hard work you do. So let's keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Henry, thank you so much.
Great talking to you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Locally Grown In. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Really appreciate you following our blog and this podcast. We do really want to hear from you, so let us know. And definitely check out our website. We've got a list of events for the industry of urban agriculture, indoor farming, vertical farming. We've got lots of blog posts, research articles, and tons of free content for you to access. Check it out at agritecture.com, and see you next time on Locally Grown In.